Dr. Gregory Ashford was a man of precision, intellect, and composure. A highly respected surgeon at St. Martin's Medical Center, one of the city's largest hospitals, he had built a career founded on his surgical brilliance. For over a decade, he was hailed as a miracle worker. His scalpel could repair the most broken of bodies, his expertise unmatched. He was known for his quiet demeanor, a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. His colleagues respected him, and patients trusted him with their lives. Yet, behind his cold, calculated exterior, there was a darkness that no one could have fathomed. The hospital's head surgeon, Dr. Evelyn Brooks, had been brought in to breathe new life into the hospital's surgical department. Brilliant, ambitious, and fiercely intelligent, Dr. Brooks had heard of Ashford's reputation before joining the hospital, but there was something about him that unsettled her. While she admired his surgical prowess, she always sensed an underlying coldness in his demeanor, as if he were not just performing operations but something more sinister. It was something she couldn't quite put her finger on, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Ashford than met the eye. Their professional relationship was one of mutual respect, but it was also strained. Dr. Ashford's methodical, almost robotic way of working often clashed with Dr. Brooks's more modern approach. While she believed in using the latest techniques and exploring innovative treatments, he was a man anchored in the old ways, doing what had always worked. Yet, her ambition and drive to overhaul the department had earned her the respect of everyone in the hospital, except Ashford. Despite this, they had forged a delicate alliance, both professionals who could keep their distance but also work together when needed. What neither Dr. Brooks nor anyone else at the hospital knew was that Dr. Ashford's true passion lay not in saving lives, but in controlling them. His obsession with the human body wasn't rooted in healing, it was in manipulation, power, and perfection. The first patient he killed had been an accident. Or, perhaps, it was fate. He had been performing a routine surgery on an elderly woman, and something went wrong, a complication that led to her death on the table. But for Ashford, this death had been exhilarating. He felt the power of life and death in his hands and soon realized he could control this moment, how patients lived, how they died. It became an addiction. He started to plan his kills carefully. He didn't want to get caught, and so he used his medical knowledge to cover his tracks. His scalpel became his instrument of death. He performed hundreds of surgeries, each with the intent of causing the patient to die, but in such a way that it would be classified as an unfortunate complication. He picked his victims carefully, patients who were already vulnerable, those whose deaths would be explained away as accidents. Sometimes it was an overdose of anesthesia, sometimes a tiny slip of the scalpel. Each death was calculated, and the hospital never suspected a thing. For years, Dr. Ashford's reign of terror continued, but he was smart. He kept up appearances, and his colleagues thought him a genius. Even his closest friends, like Dr. Henry Mills, his surgical partner, had no idea. Mills had been with Ashford for over a decade, and the two had become close colleagues, often working late into the night on difficult surgeries. Ashford had always been the quiet, distant type, but Mills had never questioned his behavior. Mills thought nothing of the mysterious deaths that seemed to plague the hospital, nothing to suspect but the usual medical complications. But Dr. Ashford's secret had begun to unravel. Dr. Evelyn Brooks, the new head of surgery, had started to notice anomalies in the surgical records. There were patterns to the deaths that couldn't be explained away by medical error. She found that a disproportionate number of patients who had died under Ashford's knife had seemingly healthy histories, young, otherwise fit individuals who had gone in for routine procedures and never came out. The strangest part was that many of these deaths happened during or immediately after Ashford's surgeries. She didn't have enough to accuse him outright, but there were too many coincidences to ignore. She began to dig deeper. The more she searched, the more disturbing the findings became. She discovered that Ashford had performed hundreds of operations on patients who had died in inexplicable ways. Some had died from complications that weren't listed on their medical charts. others from injuries that didn't add up. Yet, every time, Dr. Ashford had been the one to perform the procedure. With mounting horror, Dr. Brooks realized that something much darker was happening at St. Martin's Hospital. But before she could make her move, she had to confront the unthinkable truth. Ashford was the killer, and he was methodical. He had been killing patients for over 10 years, and he had become so skilled at it that no one even questioned it. His patients had been reduced to nothing more than tools in his twisted experiments. He had killed over 1,000 people, all while maintaining the image of a brilliant, well-liked surgeon. Dr. Brooks, feeling the weight of the evidence on her shoulders, approached the hospital board with her findings. They were horrified, but they were also too afraid to act. Ashford was a legend, someone whose name carried weight, and they feared the public backlash. But it was clear, something had to be done. Dr. Ashford, however, was already one step ahead. When the hospital board called him in for a meeting, he knew what they were planning. He was calm, even cheerful, as they discussed the allegations. His practiced charisma kept the board at bay, allowing him to charm them into disbelief. But the next day, as the police arrived to arrest him, Ashford set his plan into motion. The hospital went into lockdown. The lights flickered, then went out. The security system was disabled. No one knew who had done it or how it was happening, but as soon as the hospital doors slammed shut and the security gates fell, Dr. Ashford was no longer just a surgeon, he was a predator. The hospital was now his hunting ground, and the people inside were his prey. He knew the hospital better than anyone else. He'd spent years studying every hallway, every hidden door, every security breach. As the power went out, the survivors of the lockdown scrambled for safety. Dr. Ashford moved through the shadows like a ghost, surgical scalpel in hand, picking off anyone he encountered. Nurses, doctors, patients, all fell under his blade. His control was total. He wasn't just killing for pleasure now, he was eliminating any witnesses who might expose him. Dr. Mills, his old partner, was one of the first to realize something was wrong. He had always been close to Ashford, but as bodies began to pile up, the horrific truth dawned on him. His own friend, the man he trusted above all others, was the one responsible for the deaths. As the realization hit, Mills tried to warn others, but Ashford was waiting. Their final confrontation was brutal. Mills was cornered in the hospital's operating theater, a place where he had once worked side by side with Ashford. There, Ashford revealed the full extent of his madness, confessing to every death, every victim, and explaining how he had relished each kill. "I gave them a gift," Ashford said, his voice low and twisted. "Each life, each death, it was all part of my work. The body is an art. And I am the artist." Mills tried to fight back, but Ashford was too quick, too calculated. He moved like a surgeon, each strike precise and deadly. In the end, Mills fell to the floor, his life drained away by the hands of the man he had once called a friend. The remaining survivors, including Dr. Brooks and a few staff members, made their way through the hospital, barricading themselves in rooms and using whatever they could find to protect themselves. But Ashford was relentless, using his surgical tools with terrifying precision. The survivors fought back, but there were few of them, and Ashford's madness had turned the hospital into his personal killing ground. It wasn't until Dr. Brooks managed to trap Ashford in one of the hospital's locked storage rooms that the killing spree came to an end. She confronted him, her voice trembling but strong. "You don't control this place anymore. It ends tonight." Ashford, cornered and furious, charged at her with the scalpel, but Dr. Brooks was ready. She used her knowledge of the hospital's layout to her advantage, trapping him long enough for the authorities to arrive. When they finally captured him, Ashford showed no remorse. His last words, as he was led away, were chilling. "I will always be remembered, even if you try to erase me." The investigation revealed that Dr. Gregory Ashford had killed over 1,000 people, each death meticulously planned and carried out under the guise of medical care. He had used his skill and his reputation to mask his true nature for years. but in the end, his monstrous nature had been exposed. The hospital, once a place of healing, had become a nightmare. A place where death was not accidental, but orchestrated by the hands of a man who had once sworn to save lives.